She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Ask it on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Crow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Crow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they.
All right. Hey, guess what? Good evening. And my name is Mark Penchap, and welcome to We, as we usually say, Anansi Web Education. We deal with a variety of subjects related to the villages. And, oftentimes we take you back into your little village, whether it's Philippi, whether it's Cromarty, whether it's Epsom, whether it's Evesham, whether it's Port Morant, whether it's Little India, it's Little, well, those are communities now out in Corriverton, or Little Africa, or even Leeds Village, or even 35 Village, Tarlogy, Kilmarnock, Bushlat, Alness, Manchester, Lancaster, Liverpool, and other villages across Guyana. It just so happened that I'm very familiar with those villages, including Auckland Village as well. I can't leave Auckland and Bloomfield and Letterkenny and Tain and those villages as well. Good evening, Mr. Granger. How are you? Sorry, I left out Auckland for a moment.
I'm happy to be on the program again. I'm glad to be reminded of all those villages you remember from Region 6 alone. But I'm happy to have gone to school at Auckland and to live at the village of Wim and to experience rural life in Guyana. And it's very important that this Anansi Web Education, focuses on the villages, because most Guyanese actually live in villages, not in the towns. The towns may look crowded and congested, but most Guyanese still live in villages, and it is good that we should focus on life in the villages. Thank you. It's good to be here again.
And good to have you again. And I don't want the folks who are not from those areas, those villages, to feel bad about things. We can talk about Agricola. We can talk about Buxton, Victoria, and all those villages as well on the East Coast and the East Bank and so forth and so on. But you mentioned Wim Village and the fact that you lived there. A lot of people probably don't know that you lived at Wim Village at one point in time, and we probably go down in history that we had a president and a prime minister from the same village, the village of Wim. But that's for another story. But today, we will be talking about maternal deaths. And let us first thank all those of you who are watching us, whether in Guyana, wherever you are, and we thank you for sharing the link as well, in order to spread this information that we have for you. Maternal deaths arise from any cause related to or aggravated by pregnancy. And I repeat, it's all about pregnancy, aggravated by pregnancy or its management during pregnancy and childbirth, or within 42 days of termination of pregnancy. Maternal deaths are mostly preventable. The majority of these deaths occur in low-resource settings. Low-income women are more at risk of dying during pregnancy and childbirth. Maternal deaths are also caused partly by the shortage of nurses at hospitals. An average of 18 nurses have left the public health system since 2022. And now, the first thing we're dealing with, maternal deaths arise from any cause related to aggravated and so forth and so on. And it is preventable. And I recall, Mr. Granger, back in my time, growing up on the quarantine, there were many health centers. This was in the mid to late 70s and early 80s. There were many health centers, and mothers, pregnant women walked. Sometimes they jumped in those buses, the Tata buses. the Kayo buses or hire cars to go to the health centers. For example, there was a health center at Kildonan Village. There was a health center at, I believe, at Rose Hall, another one at Port Morant. And these women will go weekly or bi-weekly for regular checkups. Those things are very important, hence the reason for those health centers. And I just thought I mentioned that, remembering how important it was back then, and it still is, for mothers to have regular checkups during the course of pregnancy, women to have regular checkups during the course of their pregnancy. And this leads me to our first question. Why have there been so many maternal deaths in Guyana? Mr. Granger?
Uh, well, I think you answered the question yourself in your opening remarks. One is that it is a result of people coming from low resource background with poverty, essentially, and poor people who don't have access to these health centers for one reason or the other are likely to be at greater risk. In addition to that, persons who are not well educated and maybe they have a difficulty in reading, they don't read the leaflets, or they don't understand the instructions, perhaps they may suffer. And there are other factors like the geographical factors. In the city, in the rural areas, you may have easier access to these clinics. But in the hinterland, particularly in regions 1, 7, 8, and 9, the Barima, Waini, Kuyuni, Mazruni, Pataro, Separuni, Rupununi, sometimes the villages are quite a great distance apart. I mean, there are over 200 Amerindian villages. And it is not easy to get from one to the other, especially in riverine areas, like in Region 8. I mean, I have known of stories in which someone at Kwebenang or Jawala might have a problem, or Kaku, and you were told to go to the center at Kamarang. Well, this is almost impossible, because the great distance, you have to go by boat. There are no roads there. Particularly in Region 8 and some areas of Region 7. So there are geographical factors that some villages are very far apart, not like the coastal at all. There are demographic factors that the population is very thinly spread out. And there are economic factors that many persons in the hinterland are poor and they just cannot afford to pay to travel. And then, of course, you have the other factors such as, their own literacy. They may not be able to read properly, and there might be shortage of trained staff at the centers, at the hospitals. And these are some of the factors which contribute to the large number of deaths. I'm not saying that in every case women must die, but at the personal level, some young girls are not ready for childbearing. That is a physiological fact. And I've encountered, I'm sure many Guyanese looking and listening to this program would have known of 12 or 13-year-old girls who are pregnant and about to deliver children, and that is a risk. And the chances of death are much higher for that category of person. Persons who are anemic, persons who have some problems with low blood count, low hemoglobin, they may also be at risk. So there are a lot of factors, and human factors, the geographical factors, demographic factors, the economic factors, which have to be borne in mind. But for a government, we must always aim at saving lives. And whatever it takes, we must make sure that the life of the mother and the child are prominent, in our planning. Not just a matter of convenience of a traveling doctor, but saving lives is important. And you have to ensure that when a woman goes into hospital, you know, she has a high chance of coming out alive when she goes in the hospital to deliver it. She is, of course, a woman is the only person, human, capable of bringing children into life. A woman should not risk death to bring life into this world. That is the reality. And too many women are dying, and we know all the reasons. We know all of the reasons. And governments and communities, the RDCs, the NDCs must work together to remove those obstacles to women's health, particularly at the time of childbirth.
And you are correct. For those of you who are now joining us this week, we're talking about maternal deaths. I recall, Mr. Granger, because I personally went out and interviewed lots of mothers who were lucky to have, survived from the hospitals, the treatment or lack thereof at the hospitals in Guyana, whether it's Georgetown, New Amsterdam, or Linden, or somewhere else. Uh, the pain that those surviving mothers endured, and some of them weren't lucky to make it through. But what we saw, and you did mention in terms of proper health care, proper information, and so forth, and access to these things, we saw a massive improvement under your presidency. Maternal deaths just decreased significantly. And that put a lot of question marks on people's minds as to how is it that the coalition under your presidency was able to reduce significantly maternal deaths. And that is as a result of government, as it was in your government's position, to ensure that citizens, regardless of where they are, have access to proper health care. We saw an improvement at New Amsterdam Hospital. We saw an improvement at Port Morant Hospital, spanking new or rehabilitated health centers across not just Port Morant, but in Blackbush Polder, Corriverton, or Skeldon, and other parts of the country. And that was timely to ensure that we stop the high increase of maternal deaths that we saw for 23 plus years under the previous administration. I just thought that I add that because it was obvious to too many people throughout the country.
It's important because it is based on a different philosophy, a different ideology, a different attitude and approach to public health. In fact, to start with, we renamed the Ministry of Health Ministry of Public Health. So I think from the start, everyone knew that we were aiming at the public, not at the special group or a special class of persons. And it was poor people who suffer most when the system becomes dysfunctional or when it doesn't work well. Poor people, and our philosophy was to aim at improving the chances of survival of the poorest in our society. And some of those people live in the remotest parts of Guyana. And so a lot of what was achieved happened because we had a different approach. We're not looking at speciality. We're not looking at shine, glitzy, glassy hospitals. We're looking at providing healthcare, primary healthcare at the level that it counts most. That is the level of the mother in the village. And in my view, the entire governmental system, the local government system, the NDCs must focus on the individual citizens. And I think that is one of the reasons why we were able to reduce the rate. And of course, there was a lot of cooperation from PAHO. We had a time Dr. William Adukro, and he's very helpful. He behaved almost like a Guyanese. He's very concerned about improving maternal health. So we brought a different attitude, a different approach, and we recommend primary health care, PHC, as the basic philosophy in public health. And I think that was responsible for controlling the rate. The rate is still high, It was high before, and it is still too high now. Um, and having a rate of more than one a month, or one death a month, is still intolerable. It's high by international standards, high by Caribbean standards.
All right. If you're now joining us, this is we Web Education with President David Arthur Granger. We're talking about issues affecting all Guyanese, especially in the villages, and today we're talking about maternal deaths. And people are aware that the decline of maternal deaths happened on the your presidency, Mr. Granger, because your government showed obvious interest in that, and through the Ministry of Health are changed to Public Health. What we also observe is that the increase of maternal deaths after this regime took office, again, it's back. It's not as high as it used to be under their previous administration, but it's higher than what it was under your presidency. Even as the Public Health Ministry has a Minister of Health, it has two former Ministers of Health, lots of advisors, but they seem not to be getting it right at all, unfortunately. Now, let's go to the second subject here, which has to do with who have been the main victims of maternal mortality. Mr. Granger?
Well, Mark, in addition to people who are suffering from deprived background, poverty and low education, we also have the personal qualities, the personal characteristics of the victims, who many people who died. One of them is teenage pregnancies. A teenager, 12 or 13-year-old girl who is about to deliver a child is likely to be more susceptible to the problems affecting, more likely to die than a mature person. In fact, I think I'm not a doctor, but some people recommend, that you shouldn't attempt childbearing before the body is ready at age 20 or 21. So teen pregnancy is certainly one of the characteristics of the main victims. The human body is not ready for child delivery, and I think people must get the type of advice. Secondly, nutrition. Persons who are malnourished or persons who are anemic and have a low blood count are also susceptible and likely to be victims of maternal mortality, and they may have other conditions, diabetic or other health conditions, which make it very risky for them to bear children. And persons who do not have access to the same health centers you're speaking about, and even when you get to the health center, the person who is in charge there, they may not be midwives, they may not be nurses in sufficient numbers. This could lead to people in remote areas becoming victims or dying as a result of, I wouldn't call it neglect, but if there are no centers and no trained staff or inadequate trained staff, that is a factor. So the main victims are likely to be poor women, women who are not educated, maybe women who did not attend the prenatal classes, women who, for one or the other reason, discontinue their attendance or treatment. These are people who are likely to be victims, and these must be the targets of any remedial efforts on the part of the public health ministry or the government. You have to look at the poorest persons and in the most remote areas, not only in the hinterland, but also in remote coastland villages. But the target must always be the persons who are most at risk. And again, teenage girls are perhaps very close to the head of the list. Their bodies are not suitable for childbearing, and they must get the type of advice to postpone, and they must also get advice on contraception. Maybe some religious people don't believe in that, but if you want to save the girl's life, well, she has to get advice on contraception. And sometimes there may be need for termination of pregnancy because the pregnancy is dangerous to the mother. And if she tries to carry the pregnancy through the full course, she will probably die. So these are some of the factors. Again, a gynecologist could give you better advice, but these are some of the factors with which I'm familiar. We need to pay attention to nursing and midwifery. We must make sure that there are enough nurses and midwives in the system who can attend to the fact that the reality that wherever people are, they'll get children. Wherever men and women come together, there'll be children. And it means that there must be facilities to ensure safe childbirth. So that's human existence, and we have to pay attention to that reality. So the main victims have been poor people, uneducated people, people who don't have proper income or occupation, and persons who don't have access to the government. The Guyana public health system is not perfect, but it is widespread. And throughout both regimes, I think there has been some attention to ensuring that these clinics, antenatal clinics and programs are maintained. No government in Guyana, the APNU, AFC on the one hand, and the PPPC on the other, have a background of attentiveness to poor people. And I believe that much more can be done, but we have to pay attention to the women themselves to make sure that they receive the nutrition and that they are of age. They are of age. If you have to be 18 to get a driving license, people should consider that getting a child at age 13 is definitely premature.
Absolutely. President David Arthur Granger giving his views there on what or who have been the main victims of maternal mortality that's in Guyana. One of the things, though, I wish to point out again is that citizens saw a massive improvement in the health sector and the decline of maternal deaths under the coalition government, under David Arthur Granger's presidency. And people are still remembering that, and they're saying kudos to that. We saw lots of information pertaining to what can be prevented or methods of prevention being circulated in villages and communities and so forth, easy access to health care and so forth under the coalition. Again, for 23 plus years, that was largely missing from the PPP regime. We're seeing a neglect of that again under the PPP regime again. I just thought I made that clear to our listeners who are very concerned. The other thing, Mr. Granger, before we go to our final topic, a final subject, is the fact that no one has been successful in suing for malpractice. That is of concern to lots of victims and people who oftentimes suffer at the hands of incompetent, maybe doctors or staff members at the hospital. No one has ever, from my recollection, won a lawsuit. And so that might be a deterrent to people to say, look, it's a waste of time. We get no justice at all. You wish to comment on that?
It's difficult. It's difficult, to make a rule about that. It is not like a landlord and tenant. It is not like a traffic accident. And I think the medical profession, at all levels, professionals might be reluctant to criticize one another, and or might be reluctant to blame, nurses, when perhaps there might be some systemic problem, that they didn't have enough blood, or there might have been a blackout, or equipment wasn't working, and so on. And at that time, I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying that there's a reason why lawsuits have not been successful, but there is a medical council, and people have been, reported to the medical council, and I presume that some form of disciplinary action was taken. And I think, on the other hand, we must pay attention to removing, the problems and remedying faults, rather than having a punitive system where the nurses and doctors are living in terror. And I don't know the answer, but I don't think lawsuits are easy. But in the case of malpractice, I think you need to get the advice of a lawyer on that. But I don't know why they haven't been successful. I don't know how many suits have been brought. I know there have been lots of complaints, but these complaints, have been investigated, and for one reason or the other, but these incidents have been traumatic. A mother who loses any child, first or not, it's unforgettable, and families are blown apart by some of these deaths, and which they feel are preventable. And as I said, most maternal deaths are preventable. And I think, coming back to what you say, if you know that a death is preventable, why was it prevented? I suppose if I was a lawyer, you'd probably find a reason why the death occurred. But I think that's a topic that might be dealt with by medical, lawyers or attorneys who have experience in that field. Most deaths are preventable, and I think we must aim at the positive approach to prevent deaths by some form of primary health care system.
Well said. As we lean towards the final question here, but even before we go to the final question, Guyana does have a medical council, and many people seem not to have much confidence in that medical council, because nothing ever comes out of it. Nobody's disciplined. 99.9% of the folks, the inquiry, it just goes underneath the rug, and that's it. And that by itself, it's not healthy for a democracy. It's not healthy if we're looking for improvement in the healthcare sector to have, in my opinion, a medical council that is basically too probably caught up in protecting each other. All right, but again, that's my opinion here on Anansi Web Education. Good evening to you guys who have just joined us late. We go to the final question here. Mr. Granger, what steps can be taken to reduce the migration of nurses from Guyana? Because, we have seen hundreds upon hundreds of nurses are migrating. They're leaving to greener pastures, so to speak, even as we're supposed to be a country with billions upon billions of dollars. We saw the other day hundreds of Trinidadians are flocking to Guyana for work. But here it is, we have hundreds upon hundreds of nurses are leaving the shores of Guyana.
Yes, it is a tragedy, approaching catastrophe. As you know, this year, May 2023, 100 nurses resigned in 1 month. And the trickle has turned to a torrent, quite frankly. It is unsustainable. And I think that the government has acknowledged that there's a problem, and they've talked about recruiting people from another country. Well, you normally have language problems, you bring Spanish speakers or French speakers or people who do not have English as a first language, there are likely to be problems. But let us solve the problem in Guyana first. What are the problems facing the nurses? One, it is not always financial. There's this myth that nurses want more money. Everybody wants to live comfortably, and if you see the conditions under which they work, you would understand why they make these demands. One, the training. The nursing school must find young men and women who really love their profession and who receive the best possible training. And we have to look at what is happening. In some years, we've had some terrible results from students at the schools, and then we've had problems at the Charles Rosa School in Linden. And we must ensure that persons who want to enter the profession are unhindered, that they have free access into the schools, and that people don't impose artificial quotas, as happened in the early days of the present administration. There are not enough nurses anywhere, and people who are willing to go into the profession must be assisted, and the training that they get at the schools must be the finest, because these are people who are going to have the lives of women in their hands. So that's the first thing. We must make sure they're well trained. The danger is that some backward administrators feel that well-trained people will migrate. Well, it is not a good choice to keep poorly trained people in the hope that they will stay. Poorly trained people will cause lives. Train, give them the best possible training, but then ensure that the conditions under which they work are the best that you can provide. That is, women, well, a majority of nurses are women, and they probably have children themselves, and they want to have a living wage. And this administration must come to terms with the fact that it must sit down with the union which represents the nurses, the Ghana Public Service Union, and discuss ways and means of improving the conditions, salaries and other conditions of work. Not just sugar workers, but persons who have the lives of women in their hands every day. And this question of not sitting down and entering into negotiation, not recognizing the rights of the unions to bargain, collective bargaining agreements, I think that has been a big obstacle. I think the administration must treat the trade unions with respect and treat the nurses with respect, because the nurses support the trade unions. So there's no point circumventing and dealing direct. That wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. That might be good in USSR, but we are in a new era. We are in a free country, and I think that the government must demonstrate good faith by sitting down with the union which represents the nurses to find what are the real problems affecting the nurses. Don't have some, stadium and ask people to get up and say what they think the problems are. Let them use the means which have been established, for the last 100 years, and use the representative bodies to articulate their grievances. And then you will really discover what needs to be done, not only in terms of salaries, but in terms of conditions. For example, providing transport, providing, better benefits for them, because they have children and they don't want to go to work and leave their children unattended. Things like that. But I'm not here to speak for the nurses. I'm here to speak for the system, that, there's a push factor. In any country, any poor third world country, there will always be a pull factor. And when you hear the figures that a person could migrate from Guyana 1 month and be earning 5 times or salary, real take-home pay. People sending back money to buy many buses or to help their colleagues. People could help their families. There will always be a pull factor, but the government has to take that into consideration and provide the conditions here. If it's housing, if it's salaries, if it is transportation, if it is other benefits, the government must listen to the unions, and this is not happening, unfortunately. And bearing in mind that people have alternatives. People have alternatives, and if the conditions locally are not satisfactory, they'll migrate. If you were in a rural village, hinterland village, and you feel life is too hard, you come to the town, you come to the big city. And similarly, if you were in Guyana and you feel the conditions are unsatisfactory, you go to a metropolitan country. You'll seek to get an appointment at, uh, in Britain or United States or Canada. This happened. This happened throughout the PPP regime with the teachers. People would come from Botswana and recruit teachers by the plane load because of the way the administration was treating teachers and the teachers union, and it's going to continue to happen unless this administration sits down and speaks to representatives of those categories of workers, public servants and teachers and nurses and so on. So people have choices, and in my view, the process is cumulative. That if 2 or 3 nurses from one hospital migrate and they see the conditions are favorable, they would send back. And you find more and more nurses continue to go. So it will never end. But I believe if the government changed its attitude to the unions, particularly, which are legitimate representative agencies for the nurses and midwives and other categories of public servants, it would help us to reduce the emigration of nurses out of Guyana. Right now, we're not seeing those movements. We are seeing arrogance on one side. We're seeing non-communication. We're hearing talk about dealing directly. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. You have to make the system work. If the system is flawed, fix the system. Do not believe that a person at the highest levels of government could solve every problem affecting every category of work, every sugar worker, every public servant, every nurse, every doctor, every soldier, every policeman. No, it can't work like that. Life is too complex, and we must use the system and recognize the legitimate representatives of the agency. So if we want to reduce the migration of nurses from Guyana, we need to pay attention to the legitimate needs of the nurses. And when you see nurses picketing in public, this is not arrogance or brazenness. This is concern. Listen to us. This is what they're saying. Hear what we are saying. And when an administration turns a blind eye or a deaf ear to the system which sustains the health of its women and the population as a whole, we're heading in the wrong direction. So I would say to reduce migration, let us go back to the bargaining table. Let the administration sit down with the representatives of the nurses, find out what the problems are, because they know the problems. They know the problems. Not a few handpicked representatives at some seminar, but speak to the unions and let the unions help to make the system work. Migration is a reality. People migrate always from rural to urban and from colony or peripheral country to the metropolitan country. It is not something that can be removed. It is something that can be reduced. And I think in Guyana, we have committed nurses and midwives who don't want to go. They want to stay with their families. They want to stay with their loved ones, but they want better conditions.
Well said, President David Arthur Granger there. Today we dealt with maternal deaths and a rise from any cause related to or aggravated by pregnancy or its management during pregnancy and childbirth or within 42 days of termination. And the 3 questions we had answered today posed to David Arthur Granger, former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. One has to do with why have there been so many maternal deaths in Guyana, which he answered, and who have been the main victims of maternal mortality. And finally, we dealt with what steps can be taken to reduce the migration of nurses from Guyana. We hope that those areas covered were helpful for you. I know some of you out there might have your own opinions as well to add. many of the doctors and nurses who are watching, or even those who would have unfortunately experienced some sort of bad experience at events at those hospitals. We miss those days where healthcare, we saw a massive improvement in the healthcare system in Guyana under David Granger's presidency. Unfortunately, things seem to be on the decline today. Mr. Granger, thank you so much for your time as always. Looking forward to have you back again next week. Same place, same time, right here on 107.1 FM. Please give my regards to.
Thank you for having me on the program. And let us bear in mind that no Guyanese woman who puts her life on the line to bring life in this country should risk death. That
Absolutely.
is my motto. No
Yeah,
Guyanese woman who put her life on the line, risking death, to bring life into this world, should have to undergo this trauma and the agony, just the thought of going into the delivery of a child. Thought of childbirth should be a happy experience and not one that we should be afraid of. Thank you, and it's been a joy being on this program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Granger. Appreciate your time. See you back, same place, same time here next week. And to all of you watching us, listening to us, whether in Guyana or outside of Guyana, thank you much and enjoy the rest of the evening. God bless.
She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Ask it on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For their morning, the day is dawning. Forgot a crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cock crow, dog a bark, donkey bray, horse and neigh, even duck a quack. Cock crow, dog a bark, donkey bray, horse and neigh, even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country.